Hey everyone, this is Erin Ashley Simon.
This is Brandon Killabh.
Welcome to another episode of Grassroots Podcast about the stories and opinions of influencers and ourselves. Today we have a special guest. I know all of you artists are going to be so excited about this one.
Yeah.
This man's from Def Jam. He handles digital marketing.
The historic
He's a silent
Def
G.
Jam.
Oh, man. Let's get it.
So introduce yourself. Let our listeners know who you are and a little bit, I guess, about your background.
Cool. Will do. It's J.D. Tuminski. I'm currently VP of Digital at Def Jam. I started out a little while ago. I started out from the blogosphere. I started out in like the 2007, 2008 era where blogs were just really popping off. Beginning of when social media just started taking off, and from the blogosphere, I sort of transitioned into a job at HBO. So I was doing a little bit of social and digital there. And eventually I made my way over to Columbia Records, which I was there for just under 5 years. And now I've been at Def Jam for about 6 months and counting. And so far, so good. But yeah, excited to be here.
Well, I mean, you obviously have an extensive background. With many talents. I see that you did a lot of interviews early on, a lot of high profile guests like Kendrick Lamar and just a bunch of people. But you also take pictures as well.
Yeah, so the whole blog thing was definitely self-taught. It was just a way of me propelling some of the artists that I was a fan of at the time. So, you know, it started out with the Kendrick Lamars and the Drakes and the Kid Cudis back in 2007 before they were who they are today. Mm-hmm. Also, Wale was a big one back then, too. Yeah. So I did one of Wale's first national interviews when I was an intern at MTV News. Nice. I was one of the first, I want to say, like 3 interviews. Kid Cudi. We had Big Sean. We have Kendrick Lamar, like you said. We had J-Rock and Asher Roth and a few others. So the purpose of really getting to blogosphere is really to push my artists. So aside from blogging and doing that kind of thing, I sort of self-taught my way into photography and videography. Mm-hmm. So since I immersed myself in the culture when I lived in New York City, I was at all the shows and doing all this stuff anyways. So I used to just bring a camera with me. So I had access to these artists because of the website, and eventually I turned that into more of a professional craft where I received a professional camera, and I started diving into that a little bit more, and then I started getting the photo credentials to festivals and all the events and all the shows. So it was really just about, again, just immersing myself in the culture based on the website, and then I sort of found my way into these other avenues, which I still do today to a certain extent. So
the skill sets that you've developed during the blogging phase and when you were doing photography started out, how have those skill sets been helpful now doing digital for Def Jam? Yeah,
so I mean, I always saw myself as sort of part of the ahead of the curve when it came to identifying trends, identifying artists, seeing what's next, what's now. So I think that really translates to what I do on a day-to-day basis in the digital space. So whether it's social or whether it's an advertising campaign or whether it's specialized content for each artist, I think my head's there when it's coming to how are we going to promote this artist and market this artist online. So all of that in conjunction with, I'd say a pretty good eye for photography and videography and things like that. And creativity is definitely a special set of mine. I think all that combines into becoming an efficient and effective digital marketer nowadays. So I think that's how it's all sort of translated into where I am now.
Yeah. Now, when we think digital, that's the new wave of things now. Everything is digital between, obviously, Instagram, Twitter, and stuff like this. Do you feel a sense of, I guess, pressure going into Def Jam now and having to kind of revamp you guys? We talked about this early on, but there's a whole new regime now. There's maybe a little bit of sense of pressure here. So how do you handle something like that? And then what's your game plan, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's really, I mean, that's why I was brought in there in the first place. The people that identified me and brought me in understood my talents from when I was at Columbia Records. So when I was at Columbia Records for about 5 years, I was working campaigns for Beyonce and J.Cole and Dej Loaf and Juicy J and Calvin Harris and a number of other artists. So it was really about identifying my strengths there and bringing it over to Def Jam and seeing how we could elevate our artists from where they're at now and what we're trying to do. So combining that with just being ahead of the curve, like I said, and I have a really good relationship with all of our third-party partners as well. So we have close relationships with, the partners that you just mentioned, in addition to the YouTubes and the Vivos and the Tumblrs and things like that. So we're always putting an emphasis on breaking new ground and seeing what we can do with these artists. So whether it comes from internally from myself and my team or working with these third-party companies, we're always trying to push the limits on what we can do and bringing that creativity to the masses. I think one of the ones that I mentioned in our talk at the Digilog a few weeks back was the Vince Staples GoFundMe campaign, which I think our team really came together to make that happen, and that was something that was uniquely set out to do with Vince Staples and his humor and his way of addressing topics and things like that. So I'd encourage everybody listening to go check out that campaign and check out some of the feedback we got there. Because
on GoFundMe.com, you can decide to donate to the cause of $2 million, which will allow me to shut the fuck up forever, and you will never hear from me again. No songs, no interviews, no anything. If not, you can choose to let me do what the fuck I want to do when I want to do it. Get off of my dick or fund my lifestyle. The choice is yours. Either way, we appreciate you.
But that was a campaign that was uniquely Vince Staples, and I don't know if other artists could have done that, but I credit Vince and the entire team at Def Jam and management for really helping get that done.
Yo, JD is great, man. His answers are very I don't even know if this is media trained. I feel like he's Jedi mind tricking me to believe all this stuff that he's saying, man. I bought in. I'm just saying, I'm bought in. I'm just like, wow, man, that's great.
Appreciate you.
It's really dope.
He's a pro. That's what it is.
You can tell you've been around.
I'm trying. I just gave a talk, so I was down at Clemson University where I went to college. And I just gave a talk to some marketing folks there about new media and digital and social. So I'm a little prepped. I was just doing that on Friday afternoon. So it was a good experience, though, because Clemson is a small place in South Carolina where they're not traditionally exposed to the insight into music or entertainment. So that was a really good opportunity to be down there and talk to those kids. Yeah. Empower the youth.
Agree.
Always. Yeah. We were on the panel, so I'm very big on that. When it comes to the digital team, are you guys kind of part of the team that deals with social media crisis control? Sabrina Claudio, they found out she had some tweets. Yeah. People didn't like it. Instagram, some could say it's a little racist. Is your team part of that team that kind of deals with oh shit, our artist has mad racist tweets. What do we do? What's the process?
So, we haven't been in that. I haven't been in that position since I've been there thus far. But I would assume that I would have that input into advising the artists and managers on what to do, and from a Def Jam standpoint, along with sort of the staff at Def Jam. But that's a hard thing because, again, I haven't really been in that scenario. But what do you do if you're Sabrina? I think from a personal standpoint, you go right at it and you address what you did rather than trying to skirt around it and trying to make excuses. It's something you did. It's something that was wrong. But I think you just go ahead and just address it head on. That's what I would do. Yeah. But if we were to encounter something that in the near future, I think that's something we would probably discuss internally and then go back to the artist and figure out how he or she wants to deal with it. But from a Def Jam brand standpoint, we would allow the artist to really, make that statement, and then we would handle accordingly from there.
Do you guys have people that comb through your artist's social media to look and make sure that things like that aren't out there? There's of course you want to give them freedom of expression, everything, but then there also has to be some kind of monitoring that has to occur to make sure that they're not being reckless and crazy and saying racist ass shit and stuff like that.
Yeah. So again, we allow the artists to be the artists, so we're not stopping them from making a political statement or saying something which they think is right in their minds. But we are, we're taking a look at what they're doing. We have notifications on when whoever's tweeting or whatever, when everybody's posting. So we're all following that and seeing what they're doing and acting accordingly. But we're not the type of company that holds people back from making their statements on what they want to do. But yeah, with that said, we are just because we're curious, because again, we don't control anything they say. So you never know when artist A, B, or C comes wakes up and has these feelings. So we need to just pay attention to what they're doing and sort of act accordingly. But
it's got to be like a weary thing, though, to be, at the head and the helm of, digital, and then worry about these artists that you obviously may not have media training or may not have common sense, which is obviously not common, and then also have the wherewithal of knowing how to conduct themselves and what their presence could be, to the public. So, I mean, like when you're, I guess, thinking about these types of situations, do you normally kind of try to forecast it and at least try to get ahead of the curve with maybe certain artists?
Yeah, so with every artist, I mean, we have close relationships with the managers and the artists themselves. So right off the bat, we're always talking to them about what they should be doing versus not be doing on the various social media accounts. We credit our partners for always informing us on best practices and things like that. So we definitely identify the do's and don'ts, and we try to guide them as best as we can. But again, we don't control them. We don't tell them what to do or what not to do. But we can certainly suggest things to do and not to do. And that's when the digital team really comes into play with managers and the artists and figuring out that dynamic. And then, like you said, media training is something that with a new artist who is just signed and doesn't really have that training, we will go through that process with the publicity team on again the do's and don'ts. So it's just about educating them on what works, which versus what doesn't work, and just putting those suggestions in the air. And if they're going to take them, they're going to take them. And if the artist is really motivated to say what he or she wants to say, they'll do it anyway. So but we certainly as professionals advise them on certain things. Yeah.
So in terms of suggestion, let's just say there's a lot of artists that listen to our podcast, and let's just say there's artist A that could be potentially signed by Def Jam. Pre-signing, what are some suggestions that you would give to artists to, I guess, for them to enhance their brand through digital marketing? Or what's something that you see artists aren't quite doing that they should maybe be doing as a suggestion within the digital world?
I think, especially on socials, I like to see when artists are actively, I think we look at numbers nowadays, but the smart ones are looking at engagement. So even with your podcast, I'm sure you have a set of engaged folks, and you're doing your best to engage with those people. So I think I definitely look for engagement. What's the engagement rate versus, 1 million followers is nothing without engagement. So I'm looking for engagement if that's strong. So is that person talking to their fans? Are they part of the conversation? Are they smart about where they're reaching out to when it comes to publicity and features and things like that? And I think you can navigate that in a way where you can be noticed a little bit more. So I definitely look at certain websites and certain places, like we were talking about earlier, but DJ Booth is a great place which gives exposure to artists and gives them a voice. It gives them a voice to also write in and share their personal thoughts. So I think those are interesting ways to stand out. I think nowadays just keeping up with what's popular and some of the trends, and not to say podcasting is a trend, but this is a great platform that a lot of artists nowadays are taking advantage of and sharing their own stories. So I think putting your story out there and exposing the fans of the story to really buy into you as an artist and not just a song is something that I look for, and I think that's really important. There's a lot of artists that have songs, but there's not a lot of artists that have a true brand that people buy into and people are invested in.
Yeah.
So those are a few things I look at. And then, you know, there are other artists that are doing unique things. There's a lot of artists stepping into the gaming worlds nowadays. And there's a lot of artists that are recognizing themselves as a brand beyond just music. So I think stepping into some of those unique arenas, which aren't standards, are cool things to do.
Yeah. So I have a question just about the climate of music, and you talked about trends and things like that. It seems like the growing trend now is artists now wanting to be independent, not really wanting to go with labels, and some may just be bandwagoners just because it's the wave, and then some may have legitimate reasons. How do you guys try to circumvent that, knowing that now, you know, you're putting this core team together over at Def Jam, and you guys have a different vision from what it was back in the day? How do you guys get around those obstacles when you're really vested in maybe an artist or something like that?
Are you in regards to signing a new artist,
yeah,
potentially? I mean, when we're, you know, I'm not involved in the A&R process and the signing process personally. We leave that to those professionals there. But, you know, I think you as an artist, if there's an artist listening, I think you need to really decide how much you need the label. And I'm going to be honest, not everybody needs the label, but some people do need the label. And I think you need to just think about what that label can do for you and what you can do for the label. I think you know, the label provides a lot of services that an independent party can't really handle themselves, whether it has to do with money or timing or staff or lack thereof. You know, radio promo is still important. I think we have an in with the playlisting, which is obviously important nowadays. We have a full staff of marketing folks that are always thinking about what are the new things, what are the new opportunities. We have a syncs team that's, you know, always thinking about your music and how we can place it in movies and film and TV and things like that. So these are things that, these are services that, you know, the average artist and their team probably, you know, don't have a firm grasp on to handle themselves. So there are a lot of things to offer. I think it's thinking about what's the point where you've reached a plateau and you want to bring it to that next level, and then you start thinking about a label. But I think you want to get to a certain point where before you start thinking about signing to a label and figuring out then.
So, have you ever worked with an artist where they were signed to a label, but to regular fans, they appear independent, but they're not? Would there be a difference within marketing them digitally when people know they're signed to a label versus when it's like they're signed, but they're, I guess the appearance is that they're indie? Yeah,
there are a few that I've worked on in the past. I'm not really gonna call them out, but there are a few, and you know, the services that we provide them are a little bit different. So some of those artists stay away from the scope of what a label is and what it represents. And they want that indie feel to their music and to their marketing. So when marketing those folks, you won't see you know, Def Jam branding or Columbia branding or Epic branding or RCA branding on all their, you know, on all of the metadata and social posts and, you know, advertising and things like that. It'll be branded as such as, you know, an indie artist and whatever that person wants it to look like. So I think in that respect, it's different. I think some of the mainstream opportunities and looks are a little bit different. So a little bit more creative and out of the box versus some of the programs that we sort of just plug artists into and we pitch for there. So. It's definitely a little more bespoke when it comes to what you just mentioned, and I don't think that's, you know, there's a right or wrong thing to do it. If that's how an artist wants to maintain and that's the image he or she wants to have, that's fine. I just think that there needs to still be clear communication with the label on what he or she wants to do, and then you can go from there and build an interesting marketing plan.
I always feel like that's a slippery slope, though. Like when you find out, like some of your big artists or your fans, their whole brand is built on just being independent. You know, fuck the labels, we're not dealing with it. And then you find out that, all right, you actually have some label backing. I wonder how that, you know, they handle it from an artist perspective. I know you probably can't answer that, but I always think that that's really dangerous when you're an artist. Like, people like authenticity and like when you're just straight and forward, whatever you choose, you know, your path to be. So I just think it's dangerous.
I agree with you. I was going to use the word dangerous as well. But I think there's a right and a wrong way to do it. So a lot of those artists who have that image, they aren't at the labels hounding people for, you know, support and marketing. Sometimes it just has to do with additional funding and additional support with money.
Yeah.
And they handle all the creative and all the marketing in-house with their team. So what they're really getting out of the label isn't necessarily the big mainstream label look. It's maybe just one aspect of the label relationship.
Right.
So, you know, whether it's money or, you know, connecting them with another artist, which he or she may not have a relationship with. But there are a lot of artists that are, you know, it's hard to really say, but whether you call them independent or major, but
I like to call them Mindy.
Yeah, right.
Like,
I can't.
But a lot of those camps are still treated as independent camps. There's maybe one or two aspects that the label helps provide, and sometimes, you know, they can't cover the costs of a radio promo tour or certain things. But at the core of it, I think a lot of those artists that you're speaking of really do maintain authenticity, and they you know, they market themselves internally with their own teams, essentially.
Yeah.
So I know you can't really give up the gems too much, but what happens with your guys' department when they bring in an artist? And I know like Def Jam is one of the labels that does do a little bit of artist development before they release their artists out. There's a few that I saw last year that they were working on for some time. When you get an artist and you have to go through that development process, what is it? What's the process from like a digital marketing aspect where it's like, okay, are you developing content and concepts already with the development team or whoever's developing that artist? Or is it something where it's like, all right, they're going to take this person from point A to point B, and then point B is when we actually start developing our strategy and plan to market this artist digitally? We're
starting from the very beginning. So I can mention a few new artists on Def Jam, relatively new. There's a really talented guy out of Texas named Bobby Sessions. We just launched a single and a music video in the past week or two. We signed this guy Valet, who out of Chicago, who's pretty hot right now, and we have a handful of others. But we're marketing them and developing plans right when they sign. So whether it's just building up social figures and building up that engagement, which I mentioned before, whether it's building and banking content for later down the road, or whether it's, you know, profile pieces, get to know you pieces. I think it's really important to shed light on those artists right away, and we're always developing campaigns right from the start. But there are points where, you know, if one of their singles starts really popping off on, you know, the streaming services or radio or both, we definitely do recognize that, and we try to ramp up where need be and accentuate on some of those key tent poles. But I think we're always thinking about development plans and what we can be doing online. And that's where, again, some of our digital partners and third-party partners come into play, whether it's a developing artist program or different looks where we can put them in there and sort of shed that light. I think, you know, we're really always thinking about that kind of stuff.
Now, moving into Def Jam, because I know you said you were brought in, obviously, for all your past work. Were there certain, like, I guess, plans and procedures that you kind of got pushed back on that you knew just were inundated, needed to kind of be pulled out and go with a new trend of marketing that you were fought on, I guess, entering in early on?
Yeah, I think it's like I was telling you a little earlier, but it's you know, it's really a work in progress. I think Def Jam was and is always the definitive place in hip hop when it comes to, you know, music and culture. So right now with a new team in, we're really looking to sort of reestablish that. I know, you know, over the past couple of years, a lot of hip hop has gone the way of Epic Records and RCA, and they're great, and they've been doing really great things for it. But, you know, if you really think about it, I mean, what's the place you think of? You think of Def Jam when it comes to hip hop and, you know, what we're trying to do there. So it's certainly still a work in progress, and I think we're going to get there really soon. But yeah, I think it's about educating the people internally and doing what we do best. So, you know, we can do this, you know, 6 months from now, and then we can talk about, you know, what has progressed since then. But I think we're on a really positive path, and we've brought the right people in to really make a strong impact.
JD is great, man. I've been trying to just get him. He just won't fall for anything, man.
No.
There's gems in between the lines, though. You just gotta listen carefully. So what's the difference when you market a hip hop artist versus an R&B? I remember that K. Michelle, I interviewed her for a piece, and she was saying that the reason why she left R&B is because the part of the marketing process for R&B artists is to put their music to radio where it dies. Basically, something like that. She said.
Yeah.
So, what is the difference when you have an artist who's hip hop based versus who's maybe like pop or something else? Is there even a difference when you market them digitally?
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't worked on. I've only worked on a handful of releases since I've been at Def Jam, so I can't really speak to that there. But I think what I mentioned before and what I was talking about at the Digilog panel a few weeks back is again creating bespoke content for each of those artists, and we're always breaking down the audience, where they're coming from, what they're listening to. So we're always mining the audience data and playing to, you know, the strengths of that. So whether it's you know, a Toni Braxton album, which we recently put out, and going to where her fans are, and you know, she has TV shows and a number of different things. So it's really about getting to know the artist and where he or she fits in with their fan bases. In terms of you know, working with other partners and things like that, again, it's about pitching those ideas to them and seeing, you know, what fits versus what doesn't fit. But yeah, I think it's more about understanding the audience and then crafting the content and the rollout plan around, you know, what that audience is and, you know, where that person has traditionally been in the past in regards to whether it's playlisting or concerts and tours and things like that. So it's really about, yeah, identifying the fans and identifying the artist, playing to his or her strengths and weaknesses and going from there. You know, I've worked on a multitude of different artists. You know, when I was at Columbia, it was a little bit more diverse, obviously. So I was working on indie artists from the UK and, you know, bands that I would never have, you know, personally listened to, but I think I was exposed to that. I think it made me a more well-rounded marketer. So, you know, a Calvin Harris campaign isn't run the same way as, you know, a band like Coin, who's an up-and-coming band who's on Columbia Records. So it's different, but, you know, there are certainly elements in the core. It's kind of the same. We're always looking for content. We're always looking for, you know, social media platforms and engagement there. We're always looking for our partners. We're always looking for playlisting. We're always building digital advertising campaigns. It's just about specializing it to, you know, whichever artists and their demos.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. So as you now are obviously engulfed in the business for so many years, working with different people, you obviously were a fan of the culture. Now, actually knowing the inner workings of it and stuff, are you kind of jaded a little bit now? Like, for me, example, like I've been in music for so long that when I go to a concert, I don't go as like a fan now. Like, I go and I'll critique, like, oh, that speaker sounds off, or no, he shouldn't be. He's doing too much. His levels are off. Like, can you ever just turn off the switch of working and just being a fan for a moment?
I can actually. I still get excited to go to shows, and I still like going to events. I was at South by Southwest for a week, and
Bastard.
it was super exciting to be there and just go to these shows every single time. And whether it's my own artists or some of the other artists, I still get super excited. And, I think the biggest perk is just, you know, getting that access to certain things and not having to wait in line for hours. But I think
that's the best.
That's word.
But I've definitely done that, and that's still fun to me. And you know, there's a J.Cole event tonight. I'm sure there were, you know, thousands of kids lined up around the block. I was involved and went to a number of his Dollar in the Dream shows when I worked at Columbia and worked on J.Cole's projects. And, you know, even if I'm not as excited as I once was, which I generally am, it still makes me excited to see other people excited too.
Yeah.
Especially with projects that I'm personally working on. So I'll take a moment to really reflect, and I'll look at the crowd and see the reaction.
Yeah.
I take time. I'm very self-aware of what's going on, but I still get wrapped up in some of that excitement. It still excites me to be in the photo pit and take pictures and see the artists and see what he or she brings to the table. So, you know, I haven't really become jaded. It's just that access is great. So that's been one of the biggest perks.
What campaign were you the most, like, were you the proudest? Like, when it ended, you're like, damn, we did a good job.
Yeah, I think, you know, speaking of J.Cole, I think one of J.Cole's campaigns was one of my most proud. So before I got to Columbia Records, J.Cole is one of the artists that I was vlogging about. And I was at all of his mixtapes release parties in New York City. And I was part of that mix, and I became friends with some of their team a long time ago. So when I got to Columbia Records and I started working on the projects, it was really a dream come true for me. And I was excited every single time we talked about J. Cole and what he was putting out.
Yeah.
And 2014 Forest Hills Drive is one of my favorite projects that I've ever worked on. And I worked on that from the beginning to the end, and with the team at Rock Nation, who were great. But I was super excited to just you know, be in the presence of that music and really work on it. And I clearly remember him coming into the conference room and playing the music for the first time. That's something that I'll never forget. Wow. And you know, one of the biggest aspects of that was he rolled out the marketing plan around his house, which he bought, his childhood home in Fayetteville, and then he had the listening sessions there for fans, and there were flyaways to get there, and even just, you know, creating the web banners and, you know, the website for that was just super exciting for me, and I think I won't ever forget that one.
His rollouts are very interesting though. Like, one of my favorite rollouts from him was when he was going like door to door playing his album.
Yeah.
Like, just, I think that type of marketing to me is genius, because he obviously knows that that's shock value. You know, it's building a different connection that the person he's playing the music for will never forget.
Yeah.
Do you ever, now that you're in a position to do that, do you want to do certain things like that, I guess? And obviously not to duplicate, but to just be different and just to be innovative, you know, obviously moving forward.
Yeah, I definitely want to be. And I think the biggest reason why some of that stuff happened is because he has a great team around him, the Dreamville team and the Rock Nation team. And he's not at Columbia anymore. He's at Interscope.
Interscope, yeah.
But, you know, all of the collective teams are really passionate about him and his projects. And I think having a good team around you as an artist is super important to really getting that kind of stuff done. So I think, you know, that's stuff that I definitely want to be focused on in the near future with the Def Jam artists. And I think there are a lot of artists that are on board and a lot of teams. So it's just about finding those right ideas for, you know, the individual artists. And, you know, those one or two ideas can make or break a campaign versus rolling out, you know, 10 or 20 smaller ideas, which don't necessarily, you know, make an impact. So it's figuring out, you know, what's going to make an impact for that artist and what's going to sort of penetrate through all the noise, which there's a lot of noise nowadays. So
I just brought a question to mind. All right, so with all these accomplishments, right, what was the one campaign that you worked on you'd be like, damn, I fucked up. I could have done this differently in hindsight?
I'm probably not going to go there and do that myself. I mean, there aren't things that I or the team really messed up per se, but I think there were some campaigns with certain artists that we could have done more for. You know, if the artists and, you know, the team really rallied around some of our ideas. So I think there's some missed opportunities when some artists and their teams aren't really open to unique concepts and ideas, and you know, it's either they don't get it or they're not interested, or, you know, a number of reasons. But there's certainly artists and projects which I wish we could have done more, but it just didn't come together for one reason or another. And sometimes there's ideas that make it, you know, 50% of the way, but if they're not executed the right way, then I'd rather not roll them out than roll out something that's not complete. wasn't the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So nothing really I regret, but there's definitely more artisan campaigns, which I wish we could have done a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you always wish that you could do better. I mean, same thing with us. We always are thinking about how we can do things better with the podcast. So.
It always happens. We'll do something and then be like, damn, we could have shot this better. We forgot to ask these questions. God damn, like, you know what I mean? Those type of things. Not like you completely bombed. No, I would never ask that.
I think that also says a little bit about your personalities and always wanting to perfect the craft and do better and strive for bigger and better things, and not settling for the status quo. Yeah. And I think that's a reflection of you guys and what you're trying to bring to this podcast game and everything you guys are doing personally. So I think I'm on the same boat as you guys.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Shady. Man.
I got you, man.
So content. Basically, content rules the world.
You know what's funny about that is that was one of my slides when I was talking to the folks at Clemson last week.
Really?
One of the slides said content. And I'm not joking.
Well, look, see, we're on the same wavelength.
Great minds.
But yeah, like content rules everything. And I mean, I've had conversations with artists when I'm like, almost anything that you put out can be content. Everything from your music to your music videos to your tweets, that's all content, written, audio, video, etc. For artists, of course, they want to get their music out, etc. What do you think that, why do you think they need to focus on content that isn't music-based? Like you're saying, engagements, tweeting, having appropriate photos, correct imaging, everything like that. Or even blogging for some of them. Why is that extra content important for the growth of the artists and for them to understand they got to do more than just post music?
Yeah, I think that sort of alludes back to something I said a little while ago about successful artists having fans that really buy into them as a person and an artist versus just the music. So I think creating a well-rounded plan about what you're rolling out and what you're trying to prove as your own brand identity is super important. So again, whether it's personality pieces and get to know you pieces, or whether it's showing off other aspects of what you do, but I think taking a pride in what you do and putting that out there. So whether it's clean photographs or a strong website or anything online that really represents you. And looks really clean and represents you as a brand is super important in addition to the music. So it's really about, creating that identity and getting fans to buy into you outside of the music because, there's a million one-hit wonder cases that we can talk about, but one thing that we can generally point back to is people were invested in the song for those one-hit wonders rather than the artist. So that's why some of those artists just went away.
Yeah.
So they were focused on the one song and promoting that rather than themselves and as a bigger brand.
Yeah.
This is really my last question. I like to ask these types of questions. You're the face of Def Jam, let's just say, obviously for digital. What can we expect from you? Moving forward now, steering the ship, at least from the digital world, and, what do you see the vision of that being, or the vision of Def Jam, I should say, being?
Yeah, I think, like we were talking about, content. So
that's a shirt.
Yeah, that's definitely a shirt.
Yeah, that's a shirt.
Or a bumper sticker.
You gotta print that up and sell those.
Gotcha.
There's two main aspects to my job. It's overseeing Def Jam, as a brand, obviously along with the rest of the team. But so we're really looking for that brand identity, and we're going to be creating original content and doing things like that in the future. And then on another basis, it's promoting our artists. So and how do we bring those two together and really have those artists represent the brand as a whole? So that's what we're going to be focusing a lot this year. On bringing those facets together and pushing those out, but I think I was brought in to be a creative mind. So working with the teams internally to see how we can push the envelope and go outside the box. And I have I have a great relationship with all of our partners. So pushing the boundaries there on what we can do And I think we'll be in a really, really good place. We have a lot of good projects coming up. You know, a few that have already been announced. YG has an album. 2 Chainz has an album.
2 Chainz.
And we have a lot coming up that, you know, we haven't announced, and there's no dates that we can talk about right now. But just know that there are a lot of exciting things happening behind the scenes that you guys and everybody listening will see, you know, in the next 6 months that we really get people excited around the industry and in pop culture as a whole.
Yeah.
So we're really excited for what's to come, and yeah, good times, man.
I got one question. He just had this question pop in my head. Because you brought up 2 Chainz, and the one thing I really love about 2 Chainz, obviously, like the digital marketing behind his project is solid. But what I love is that he takes a concept and then does a live in-person activation for it. Whether it was the trap house and everything like that. Why is it important to do things like those live activations in along with digital, and why like you shouldn't just be strictly digital all the time? Like you should be doing some things that are in person or at or shows or concerts or anything like that.
Yeah, I think those experiential moments can be game changers for a campaign. So, you know, I wasn't there for that specific campaign, and props to everybody who was there that made that happen, because, you know, that really defined that project and was probably one of the best things that happened all of last year when it was rolled out, or, you know, whenever that launched. So, but I think now that you say, you know, those in-person activations, we're also thinking about the online element of that. So, you know, we're thinking about, you know, what are those social moments that are going to happen from those from that house? What's that content that's going to be captured from that house? So, you know, those digital activations don't just live, you know, in the physical world. We're transferring, you know, everything that's happening there onto the digital space as well. But I think giving those experiential moments, you know, whether it's for an album rollout or a music video, or, you know, whether it's a music festival, are really important for fans to feel empowered as though they're part of the process. And I think it builds a bigger connection between the fan and the artist when you have a rollout like that, and when you have a campaign where, you know, people can physically go to that house and, you know, go inside and take a picture and, you know, sign the wall or do whatever they do. So there are a lot of different elements that go into that and why it's important. Yeah.
Well, you heard it first, ladies and gentlemen. Rule number 1, JD is super trained in the art of of Jedi mind tricking. No, but this was insightful. Yeah. This was really, really insightful. It's always good and that's why we, you know, Erin and myself, we wanted to get you on. Yeah. Early on, we obviously exchanged in text. It's always good to hear people like JD that are, you know, obviously in the weeds and at the forefront of just digital and content and this new age, and especially you falling obviously in Def Jam, it just sheds more light on a lot of the things that are happening there. So I'm excited. I'm really anxious to see what you guys are gonna do.
Yeah, I'm excited too. That's why I said, man, it's 6 months. We should talk about, you know, everything that's been happening and you know, some of the changes. And
we got to do a follow-up. We got to do a follow-up.
I think that'd be fun, but I think the collective is super, super excited. So
yeah. I'm super excited too, because everything he's been saying, I just wish more people would like just do it, or understand it. Like I try to, even with athletes, I try to tell them like you should have content besides just posting a photo with a Dolce & Gabbana bag or something like that. Like you gotta actually have people like you know.
Well, that's the artist machismo shit. You gotta think about it. Artists have brands of being drug dealers, killers, all types of just crazy shit. They don't think, all right, people do grow up. You know what I mean? You don't have to be a drug dealer facade the rest of your life. You can be a businessman. Take Jay-Z, perfect example. He's had so many different you know, transformations throughout his life and career that you never know what he's going to be next. He could be president, he could be whatever, but at least he's setting himself up to do that. And I think a lot of artists don't think like that just because they may be ignorant to that type of way of thinking.
They also, I think they also just don't understand that there's a value exchange system. Like, I know you always want people to come listen to your music, but you have to give something to entice them to listen to your music. You can't just sit there and be like, do something for me, do something for me, do something for me. Like the artists that are great at what they do, obviously they're talented in the music space, but like they're able to connect with their fans through their content, and they're able to give something of value through their content instead of just like, you know, listen to my music.
Yeah.
I mean, the best artists now, they don't have to do promo. J.Cole just dropped, look at that. He just didn't say anything about it, just dropped it, said no media, no guest lists, first come, first serve.
That's when you know you poppin'.
And it was around the block.
I always say that when artists don't have to give release dates anymore, that's when you've hit a whole nother level of stardom and just success. You can just be like, all right, hey guys, here's the link, it's out. Like, and you'll do 500,000 copies or whatever the first day. Or whatever. That's a different type of stardom.
Man,
so
it must make you guys happy knowing all we gotta do is put that link out. You're like, okay, my job's done.
Yeah, JD's like, man, this is easy. You guys have no idea. I don't do anything.
Oh my God.
Man, but we want to thank you for coming on, JD.
Yes.
I know
for sure.
you're
Thank
super
you.
busy. Check out Def Jam, obviously. I mean, there's a lot going on. I'm excited. So I'm Brandon Killabh.
I'm Erin Ashley Simon. Our wonderful guest is
J.D. Tuminski, VP Digital at Def Jam.
The
Def Jam.
The Def Jam. We out.
Hey.